Going over the 2000 Mozambique flooding. Water is something that we all live around on a daily basis, but what happens when you have too much water? Well, that's what I'll be talking about today in this presentation. So, how did the flood in Mozambique begin? Well, the weather patterns that caused the flooding were a month of heavy rainfall brought on by Cyclone Leon Eileen from February 20th to 22nd, and heavy rain caused by Cyclone Connie in Maputo from February 4th to the 7th. But there's also a large amount of rain that took place in October and November of 99. But the floods were mostly driven by storm activity from the Indian Ocean, and in this case, two cyclones, and the rapid rising of important rivers, which I will go over soon. And the flooding itself. So the floods started in January, but they also carried over into February of 2000, and they caused the overflowing of several important rivers. On the 11th of February, the Limpopo River overflowed, which caused the flooding of villages for several miles around. And just you can see right there. And in some areas, such as at Chokwe, the Limpopo reached a height of 20 feet. And other rivers also that were greatly affected, like the Nkomati, which overwhelmed Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. The entirety of the flooding, though, lasted 5 weeks, and around 1,400 kilometers of arable land were affected. Yes. Now we have the aftermath. So there were multiple societal and economic impacts of the floods that were devastating and large. The flooding was the worst that Mozambique had seen in 50 years. All told, there were between 700 and 800 deaths caused by the flooding, and up to 650,000 people were displaced. People were forced out of their homes, onto the roofs, trees, or anywhere high enough off the ground. An interesting fact is that a woman actually gave birth to her daughter in one of said trees on March 1st, 2000. She is known as the Miracle Baby. On top of all this, though, there were also outbreaks of malaria and diarrhea. Flooding additionally greatly disrupted the water supply and blocked off key roads, and the economic costs were astronomical as well. $500 million in damages, and estimated for inflation, that's almost $1 billion. And a lot of the progress done since the end of Mozambique's civil war was greatly hindered. Farmlands, crops, which villages relied on to survive, were entirely destroyed, swamped by the rain and the overflowing rivers. As well, most households were left stranded, with no running water or food access, so hundreds died for lack of resources. Irrigation systems were destroyed, and along with 100,000 families losing their livelihoods, and 20,000 cows, which were either carried away from the storms or died in the aftermath from sickness, along with thousands of other types of livestock. So in response to the flooding, the UN created refugee camps and pleaded with families to not stay in their homes. The South African Air Force airlifted people out of flooded areas to refugee camps, and the UN Mine Action Service which had been trying to clean the country of mines since the Civil War, had made no real attempt to clean them up, but the floods actually made it easier to identify some of the mines. All told, 39.6 tons of humanitarian aid were flown into the country, but unfortunately, as is often the case in situations like these, due to the country being poor and the government being corrupt, a lot of the humanitarian aid never reached the people. And the country had no real plan to stop the more disastrous after effects of the flood. So entire villages were abandoned. The villages that did make it began to store food and come up with their own plans. And this was not the last large flood that Mozambique saw. In fact, there have been several large floods over the past 24 years since this flood took place. And these are our sources. Thanks for watching. Bye.